hours after signing an executive order that halted his administration's very hideous and unpopular policy to separate migrant families from their children at the southern border. At the rally, he mentioned the executive order almost as an afterthought.
So the Democrats want open borders. Let everybody come in. Let everybody pour in. We don't care. Let them come in from the Middle East. Let them come in from all over the place. We don't care. We're not going to let it happen. And by the way, today I signed an executive order. We're going to keep families together, but the border is going to be just as tough as it's been.
They won't admit it, but President Trump's executive order yesterday was a big reversal from what both he and his
huge reversal.
Jeff Sessions announced it in April, and the president called it a law many times.
And by the way,
he defended it.
I do have to say this because there are people out there that I saw yesterday still saying that this was Barack Obama's law.
No,
really? It's yes.
Trump's policy.
It's such a lie. It is that is as false as actually people who believe that Neil Armstrong didn't walk on the moon.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you have got to take the scales off your eyes. I mean, the president was lying to you, saying time and again that only the Congress could fix this.
Right.
They've been falsely stating today that only Congress could fix the problems and that the Democrats were to blame. Now listen, as Jesus said, let those who have ears to hear, hear. Here is the president.
Wait, you can't do it through an executive order.
Until these loopholes are closed by Congress, it is not possible as a matter of law to detain and remove whole family units who arrive illegally in the United States. Congress and the courts created this problem, and Congress alone can fix it. Congress is the one that needs to fix this. It's a law passed by the United States Congress.
There's only one body here that gets to create legislation, and it's Congress. Our job is to enforce it, and we would like to see Congress fix it. Once again, it's Congress's job to change the law.
I hate the children being taken away. The Democrats have to change their law. That's their law. The Democrats forced that law upon our nation. I hate it. Democrats gave us the laws.
And that's a Democrat bill. That's Democrats wanting to do that, and they could solve it very easily by getting together, but they think it's a good election point, but that's the law, and that's what the Democrats gave us.
And I say it's very strongly the Democrats' fault. They're they're really obstructionist, and they are obstructing. We're having a lot of problems with Democrats. They don't want to vote for anything.
This has been going on for 50 years, longer. This has been going on under President Obama, under President Bush. This has been going on for many, many years. We're going to see if we can solve it. This is not something that happened just now. You look at the images from 2014. I was watching this morning, and they were showing images from 2014. They blow away what we're looking at today. And that was not during this. That was during the Obama administration. I saw images that were horrible.
Yeah, of course, it's unbelievable. I just got to go through this, Willie. Yep. I can't do it. The president says he can't do it. I can't drink the water. He can't end this policy that Jeff Sessions announced they were starting in March. Kirstjen Nielsen says it is not possible. Congress and the courts created the problem. Only Congress and the courts can fix it. Sarah Huckabee Sanders, the Democrats did it. The Democrats have to change it. This bill, this law, we can't change it. Obama did it. Bush did it. Again, this is objective. Objectifiably, you can look at this. Everything that Kirstjen Nielsen said there was a lie. Everything that Sarah Huckabee Sanders, not a misstatement, a lie. Everything Sarah Huckabee Sanders said there was a lie. Everything the president said there was a lie. Everything that the administration's been saying about this is a lie. This is a decision Donald Trump and Jeff Sessions made, and they executed it. And yesterday, the president proved that he is a liar on this front, and that Kirstjen Nielsen went out and lied for him, and Sarah Huckabee Sanders went out and lied for him, and everybody in the administration that has said he couldn't fix this are liars.
Remember, Kirstjen Nielsen said this is not a policy. This is not even a policy. Well, then they came back the next day and they said it was a policy.
Are there any men that have been trotted out to talk about this?
And another thing, Mika, she said was when she was asked whether this policy was intended to send a message to people deciding whether or not to come into the country, she said, I am offended by that question. I am deeply offended. Well, meanwhile, Jeff Sessions, Stephen Miller, and many others have said, yes, this is a tough deterrent. This is what we want out of this. It's a tough deterrent. And by the way, we should point out, I know we'll get into it, but there are still 2,300 or so kids separated from their families. This executive order does nothing about them. Yeah. They are still sitting in legal limbo, and we don't know how they'll be unified with their parents.
And Heidi, one of the things, there's so many disturbing elements of this, but what would we be saying if Russia seized 2,300 children, and if Russia didn't allow the world to see pictures of babies being incarcerated, toddlers being incarcerated, young girls being incarcerated? The centralized state of Donald J. Trump is refusing to allow the press, and by extension Americans, to see what condition toddlers are being incarcerated in the United States of America. Babies are being, 3-year-old girls are being incarcerated. This is something that Erdogan would do. This is something that Putin would do. This does not happen in the United States of America, and I would like anybody that supports Donald Trump to tell me why is there a news blackout? Why can't we see what these young babies, what the incarceration looks like?
And if there was ever a moment that we as a nation should realize what it means that we are retreating from our traditional role as a beacon of human rights internationally, it is what is happening on our own soil. And you're right, Joe, we still have not gotten in to find out what the conditions are. And now we're talking about potentially moving these children to military-style camps. We don't have any kind of clarity as to what's going to happen after 20 days because we still have this Flores agreement. And to your point about the Orwellian world we're in, Ileana Ros-Lehtinen said it best when she said it's like the arsonist now trying to play fireman. I mean, we just go back, rewind, seriously, like 24 hours, the president himself saying, you've got to take the kids. Yeah. And then sitting in the Oval Office and hoping that the world and the nation now views him as this benevolent leader who's rolling back 60 years of bad policy. No, it's 60 days of horrific policy.
And you asked if a man had done it. Yes, this started with Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General of the United States.
Yeah, but he just got to announce it and read off a piece of paper.
We're going to have, which just proved everybody that followed was lying. So this is what's so fascinating. I guess the most intense Trumpists may say, well, they're in our country illegally. And as I have stated time and again, I'm really conservative when it comes to immigration. I think borders mean something. The international law, international order is fantastic, but I'm a big believer in borders and boundaries and nations. But that said, even political prisoners have protections under the Geneva Accords. Even political prisoners, we have a right for inspections. We even have cameras going in to Guantanamo to show Gitmo. So we get a look at the prisoners, we get a look at the conditions. Right now there's a news blackout, Richard, and I'm just wondering, again, help us put this in better perspective. We know the United States doesn't behave this way, where toddlers are incarcerated and the press is not allowed to show Americans what the situation is, and infants are incarcerated and the press is not allowed to see. Wait, where does this happen? Has this ever happened in the United States? Is this what happens in Russia, where they seize children and put them in a black hole?
I expect it's only a matter of time before someone calls for international inspectors and NGOs to come into the United States to inspect how we're doing on human rights grounds and the rest. And, building on Heidi's point, one of the most important things in foreign policy is not what diplomats do, it's the example we set as a society. The quality of our society, the quality of our politics, the strength of our economy. So this is a major international setback. We've gone a long way from being the shining city on a hill. Let me say one other thing. If you're that concerned about your borders, and we should be.
We should be, yeah.
We should be doing more in places like Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador. We have got to try to do things down there so people do not feel pressured or compelled to flee to the United States. We dramatically reduced immigration from Mexico. How? It was called NAFTA. We helped grow the Mexican economy. We work with the Mexican government.
By the way, don't tell President Trump and his supporters that one of the reasons why we had negative immigration flow into the United States over the past several years under the Obama administration was because NAFTA was working so well that actually people were flooding back to Mexico because their economy is growing.
Plan Colombia had a tremendous impact on the strength of its institutions. So if we really want to protect our borders, the way to do it is not by separating families. One of the main tools we have is to strengthen the police forces in these countries, to improve their economies, to do something about corruption. Deal with it at the source. We will then find ourselves where we don't have to make these awful policy decisions.
You mentioned international bodies inspecting what's happening here. One of the things I've been struck by is what Congress has done in response to this, which is they've jumped into a legislative debate that probably is not going to end with actual legislation passing, but they have not, as far as I can tell, launched an investigation, an oversight investigation about how this policy came into effect, but more critically, which I think we've sort of glossed over a little bit here, how 2,350 or so families were torn apart by our government, and more importantly, how our government seems either incapable or incompetent to put those families back together.
Where are the children now, Sam? How are they going to get back together? And how could the White House announce this yesterday and not have an answer to how are you going to reunite these children who were ripped, in some cases, from mothers who were breastfeeding them and taken away screaming?
The answer is either that they are morally callous about this or that they are incompetent about this and they don't have track of these children.
I think it's both, and that they're only concerned about PR.
But if we think about government tragedies in our lifetime, the idea that a government could be responsible for separating 2,350 families itself, an action it took, and then incapable of fixing it, is up there among one of the great tragedies of a government institution that I can remember.
Willie, I'll tell you what, I mean, you know, been in whatever this is for 25 years between Congress and the media, and the only other instance I can find, not 9/11 because that was an attack from an outside force, but Katrina. This is the closest thing that I've seen is Katrina. And you know, I was on the West Coast with my daughter. We were taking a father-daughter trip across the West Coast. Quite ironic that there I am able to spend time with my girl, and other parents along the southern border don't know where their 2-year-old daughter is, their 3-year-old daughter is. And I mean, it really is unspeakable. But as I was calling back home and talking to Mika and talking to everybody else, I heard anguish on the other side of the phone line to friends and family that reminded me of what they were saying during Katrina.
Well, because it's playing out in front of your eyes, right? It's on TV. It's not some hidden crisis. It's something we can watch on TV, like Katrina. We were watching and saying, how is this happening in the country we live in, and why isn't our government doing anything about it? The difference, though,
and I thought about the Katrina analogy a lot, too.
That was a natural disaster.
It was an act of nature. This is a human-made
Hold on a second, though. It was, again, not to put too fine of a point on it, it was a natural disaster made so much worse. Right. By human inaction, and also by the corruption in New Orleans.
But those are acts of omission.
New Orleans should not have flooded, and those people should not have been in that position.
These are not deliberate.
Those are acts of omission. This is more acts of commission.
Right.
And this is qualitative.
So, Jonathan Lemire, part of the reason to the question of why the Trump administration wasn't prepared better and what to do with these 2,300 kids who today are not seeing their parents, and we don't know when they will, if some of them ever will, is that it happened so quickly. Just some of your reporting on this, Donald Trump coming yesterday morning and saying, all right, let's do an executive order. The chief of staff, John Kelly, and others saying, we can't do it like this. It can't supersede law, et cetera, et cetera. How did this come to be? Donald Trump saying he wanted to get it done before he got on the plane to Minnesota.
Right. We had days of the president saying this couldn't be done this way, that he would say incorrectly that it couldn't be done by executive order, that it had to be Congress. And it really seemed like the White House was trying to pressure Capitol Hill so they would come up with some sort of solution so the president would not seen as having to reverse himself on this. And then eventually he did cave to public pressure. And as much as the White House is trying to spin this as this is sort of a benevolent act, that Trump is ending what Obama started, and it's just, of course, incorrect, this is something they changed. I think it's very striking last night at that rally in Minnesota, how he makes barely a mention of this executive order that reverses the policy, and instead spends so much of that rally really hammering home his very tough, hardline immigration stances, as if he's sort of proving that his bona fides on that issue, the issue that he thinks got him the White House, the issue why he was willing to have this fight in the first place these recent days. In our reporting, he was telling people around him that he thought this would be as good cultural war kind of victory here, akin to the NFL players kneeling for the national anthem.
Jonathan, you saw the polls. I mean, 17% supported this policy. Donald Trump was working the 17% on this policy. This is what people think this guy is such a brilliant politician. He's not. He's boiling it down. It's one of the great misreads, I think, of recent American political history. The guy lost to Hillary by 3 million electoral votes. He got elected against one of the worst campaigns and one of the worst campaigners in modern American history. They didn't even show up in Wisconsin, barely. They just sent Barack Obama to Michigan on Election Day. This guy is not a great political mind. He knows how to poke people and insult people, but he has been playing a 17% hand for a week and a half, and his poll numbers will drop from it. And already we've seen the ballot tests between Republicans and Democrats are breaking the Democrats' way.
His poll numbers had ticked up before this crisis, and as we know, Trump so often he aims all of his policies at his base, and I think this also shows us in recent days how much of it he's sort of a lone wolf. He's flying solo on a lot of these decisions. There are very few voices around him that can tell him, no, Mr. President, you shouldn't do this, and I think we're going to get to this later. That includes members of his own family, and this is a decision that he went with. Of course, there are people like Stephen Miller, John Kelly, who are advocating for it as well. But at the end of the day, this was Trump's decision, and he was very frustrated yesterday that it was also going to be seen as his reversal.
And we're going to be talking about Ivanka and Melania being the two people the report said last night that were working to get him to change the policy.
Yeah, I actually had an exchange with her yesterday, which we'll talk about. Still ahead on Morning Joe. What was Ivanka's role in all of this? We didn't hear from the top White House advisor whose focus was women and families and babies until after her father issued the executive order. Plus, Michael Cohen steps down from his role at the RNC and throws shade at the president's policies in the process. I think it's over.
Really, my torts professor would always say, as he was setting you up for the kill in torts class, he'd say, you ought to see this next question coming at you like a freight train out of the mist. And at that point, you cowered because you knew that Professor Pearson was coming at you hard.
Here comes Michael Cohen.
But here's Michael Cohen. You should be able to see what Michael Cohen's doing next, like a freight train.
What it might mean for any potential plan to cooperate with investigators. You're watching Morning Joe. We'll be right back.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.